Here's how we generate over 20,000 downloads of our podcast every month. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky from consultingsuccess.com, and I want to share with you what we do and kind of some of the best practices that we use with the Consulting Success podcast, which is our podcast that has grown from just a few thousand downloads a month to now well over 20,000 downloads a month, and it continues to grow month over month. So here are the best practices that we put in place. And so whether you are thinking about starting a podcast or you actually already run a podcast, but you want to grow distribution, you want to grow downloads, you want to grow engagement, here's how to go about it. Now, let me actually say one thing before I dive into some of these tips with you. Numbers don't really matter that much. I know very few people, and I'm certainly not interested in just advertising in terms of generating revenue from the podcast. And that's because for most people, like books, right? The book itself that you sell or the podcast itself that you have should not generate your majority of your revenue. It should be everything that comes from that. So in our case, people listen to the Consulting Success podcast. They often realize, you know what, I've been trying to build my consulting business myself, but there's so many things that I'm not doing properly, or there's so many things that I'm unsure about, and there's so many unknowns. I might as well reach out to Consulting Success. I might as well reach out to Michael and Sam and the team because I'm familiar with them through the podcast and see how they might be able to help me. And that's actually how we get a lot of clients coming into our world and being able to help so many of them to grow their consulting businesses. Therefore, don't worry just about numbers. That's kind of like a vanity metric. It doesn't matter how many downloads you have. What matters is, are you attracting the right kinds of people, and are you truly adding value for those people? So now, with that out of the way, just because I want to be very clear, there's like a lot of people out there who talk about, yeah, we generated this much in revenue, but then they never tell you what they're actually generating profit. And in many cases, it's not very much. Whereas I just prefer to focus a lot more on creating very high levels of profit. But I'm not just interested in vanity metrics. So with that rant out of the way, let's get into what you're really here for, which is tips to help you to increase your podcast distribution. All right, so number one, be niche or niche, depending on how you say it, and focused. What I mean by that, I mean, don't go in and just create another podcast on management or on leadership or on startups or whatever, because there's so many podcasts. It's now so easy to start a podcast that everyone's starting a podcast, right? And so therefore it becomes really difficult for your podcast to stand out. So if you're going to start a podcast, or if you want to re-engineer your podcast, reposition, make sure that it's very, very focused. Make sure that it's specializing in a specific area that helps you to stand out, to be like the best podcast in your area, in your domain. And that's what we aim for at the Consulting Success podcast, is really to be the best podcast for consultants, for people that are wanting to get into consulting and become successful consultants, and those who want to grow their existing consulting businesses. So that's number one, is think about how you can really specialize and who your real target audience is for your podcast. The second thing, which kind of goes without saying, but I think a lot of people maybe don't leverage it to the extent that they could, which is to use different kinds of RSS distribution, right? So these are kind of like syndications. There's a lot of different directories out there that host podcasts. So for example, you can find the Consulting Success podcast, of course, on iTunes, but you can also find it on Spotify. You can find it on Stitcher, on a whole bunch of different podcast directories. And so the greater distribution that you have, the more that you'll be able to find, or people will be able to find it. So as an example, someone who might go to, use whatever, podcast app that they have, if they type in Consulting Success podcast or even consulting, there's a good chance that our podcast will come up. And because we're kind of spreading our tentacles into greater distribution, which doesn't take us any more time, doesn't cost us any more money, but we're just getting greater distribution, we now have more people finding us, which helps the message to grow. The next is social promotion. So if you have a podcast, then you really should be promoting it on the different social platforms. So think about LinkedIn, think about Facebook, think about Twitter, think about any other platform that your ideal clients are on. You should be sharing your content on those platforms. And when you do that, then what you really should be doing to get the greatest leverage from your podcast, if you're using the format of interviews, which is what we do a lot of, where I interview other successful consultants, is I will tag them, right? So we'll go in and we'll say, this podcast with this person just launched, and we'll tag that person, right? So if it's on LinkedIn or on Facebook or whatever, they will get notified that they've been tagged in a specific post. They then see that that post came from as a result of the podcast that they were on. And then what are they most likely to do? Well, now they're most likely to like or to comment on and to share or reshare, right? Kind of post that. And so now not only is it going out through our social channels, but it's also going out and being spread through their social channels. And so that creates greater overall distribution because new people are now finding that podcast. A small percentage of them will likely subscribe to it, and they now get notified when new podcasts come out. And so we're building our kind of recurring audience in a very leveraged fashion. The other thing that we do is we send out, an email to guests, letting them know, say, hey, your podcast episode just went live. Please do share, please check it out, and so forth. And so they get that notification, which helps them to now go and let their list know or to promote it themselves. And then finally, the other thing that we find to be really helpful is to send an email out to our list, right, to our newsletter. So in our case at Consulting Success, we have about 35,000 plus consultants who are on our list, read our weekly newsletter with tips on growing a successful consulting business. And so each week we'll send out an email to the list saying, hey, check out this latest podcast episode. And because of that, a lot of people, right, go to the podcast episode right away and they listen to it and get value from it, we hope, right, which is kind of the feedback that we get. So for us, the podcast has been really, really powerful because we're able to provide great value to the community and answer a lot of questions that people have. It's something that we've been doing for a while and we'll continue doing because we do get really great feedback on it. But I just wanted to offer you a few of those tips that have really been beneficial for us in building up our distribution, building up kind of our engagement and and inquiries as well as a result of doing it. So there you have it. If what I would suggest is go to the consulting. You can go to consultingsuccess.com and click on the podcast link, or just search for Consulting Success Podcast in iTunes or any podcast directory. Listen, subscribe, check it out if you enjoy it, which I hope that you do. Please give it a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or any other platform. Always really appreciate that. But that's what's been working really well for us. I hope it'll work for you as well. If you have any questions about the podcast or about growing your consulting business or getting into consulting, just reach out to us at consultingsuccess.com. Be always happy to hear from you and happy to help. Take care and have a great day.